What if telling the truth could cost you your life, and the world its last window into a war zone? This isn't just a story about danger. It's about the very survival of independent reporting and our right to know what's real. On a Sunday night in Gaza, an Israeli airstrike killed Al Jazeera correspondent al-Sharif and at least 4 colleagues. They weren't caught by mistake. They were reporting from outside Gaza's largest hospital, determined to show the world what most cameras cannot: life under siege, hunger, and devastation. For the first time in over 22 months of conflict, Israel's military immediately accepted responsibility. No denials, no vagueness, claiming the journalists were militants. Al Jazeera and international press groups called this accusation baseless, warning it sets a terrifying new standard. The outrage was instant. The United Nations condemned the attack as a grave breach of humanitarian law. Press freedom groups saw it as punishment for bearing witness. Al Jazeera said Anas and his team were among the last voices left to show Gaza's unseen realities. This is more than a tragedy. If journalists can be killed with impunity, who will hold power to account? What's at stake is our access to truth itself. And if this becomes normal, tomorrow's governments may silence anyone who exposes inconvenient facts. But how did we reach this critical moment? And what does it mean for journalists and the rest of us going forward? Why is Gaza now the world's most dangerous place for journalists? The war in Gaza has created a nightmare for the press. Since the conflict began, nearly 270 journalists and media workers have been killed, making this, as Brown University's Watson Institute put it, quite simply the worst ever conflict for reporters. For many, it is not just crossfire or chaos that threatens their lives, but deliberate targeting. Nowhere is this clearer than in the case of Al Jazeera's reporting team. Al Jazeera stands among the very few news outlets still fielding a full team of correspondents inside the besieged Gaza Strip. Their journalists have risked everything to chronicle daily life amid relentless airstrikes, desperate hunger, and the haunting ruins of destroyed neighborhoods. For much of the world, their cameras and voices offer the only direct window into Gaza's suffering and resilience. But in Gaza, journalism itself is under attack. On Sunday, an Israeli airstrike killed Anas al-Sharif and 4 of his Al Jazeera colleagues while they sheltered outside Gaza City's main hospital. Israel swiftly claimed responsibility, publicly alleging, without providing credible evidence, that al-Sharif was a militant. This marks a chilling shift. For years, Israel has denied intentionally targeting journalists, but now authorities are not only admitting it, they are broadcasting their justifications to the world, accusing reporters of being combatants. Global press organizations, the United Nations, and thousands of mourners have condemned the attack. The UN called it a grave breach of international humanitarian law. At al-Sharif's funeral, fellow journalists and citizens demanded urgent action to protect reporters, fearing that silencing the media will bury the truth along with the victims. Why does this matter for everyone watching far from the front lines? If the few remaining on-the-ground journalists are killed or driven out, the world risks a total blackout. No witnesses, no evidence, no accountability. What happens in Gaza would become invisible, filtered only through official statements and propaganda. Without independent eyes, war crimes can be denied, suffering hidden, and facts erased. The killing of Anas al-Sharif and his colleagues marks a turning point, an open attempt to delegitimize and erase the press in plain sight. The precedent is deadly not only for Gaza, but for journalists and truth seekers everywhere. But this incident is different from all that came before. For the first time, Israel is not just denying the killing of journalists, it is defending it, openly and repeatedly. That signals a new and dangerous era in the war over information. So what changed, and why did Israel decide to claim responsibility now, instead of hiding in plausible deniability as before? Let's look at the moment the narrative itself was targeted. What happens when telling the truth can cost you your life? And who gets to decide if you live or die for your reporting? If you think war reporters are simply bystanders, think again. In today's conflicts, bearing witness could make you the next target. The stakes are sky high. If journalists can be killed with impunity, anyone's access to the truth is on the line. For decades, reporters have risked everything to show us what really happens on the world's bloodiest front lines. But the killing of al-Sharif and his Al Jazeera team in Gaza signals more than just a spike in danger. It marks a seismic shift in the rules of war coverage itself. This isn't the old chaotic fog of war where journalists are accidentally caught in the crossfire. This time, Israel's military openly admitted targeting al-Sharif, claiming he was not a journalist but a Hamas commander. Al Jazeera and al-Sharif had firmly denied these allegations months before, labeling them baseless. Yet international media and rights groups quickly noted that Israel offered scant evidence, accusing the government of orchestrating a broader smear campaign to discredit independent reporting. It's a playbook that's becoming all too familiar. On July 24th, Israel's military spokesperson released a video directly accusing al-Sharif and Al Jazeera of collaborating with Hamas's armed wing. The Committee to Protect Journalists warned, Israel's pattern of labeling journalists as militants without credible proof raises grave concerns. These warnings were largely ignored until now, when the consequences have turned deadly. The global backlash was immediate and fierce. Irene Khan, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, called the killings, quote, part of a deliberate strategy to suppress the truth, obstruct evidence of international crimes, and bury any hope of accountability. The United Nations Human Rights Office went further, calling the strike a grave breach of international humanitarian law. For many, this is a watershed moment. For the first time in this 22-month war, Israel hasn't distanced itself from the killing of journalists. It has justified it. The blurring of lines between reporter and combatant is no accident. By branding journalists as enemy operatives, governments can silence critical voices with bullets and paint inconvenient truths as enemy propaganda. Press freedom groups are raising red flags. The Committee to Protect Journalists said it was appalled by the attack. With nearly 200 journalists killed in Gaza since the conflict erupted, the scale of loss is unprecedented. Al Jazeera, one of the last major newsrooms still operating inside the besieged strip, lost 5 staff members in this single strike. The message could not be clearer. In this war, bearing witness is now equated with taking sides, and the penalty is death. If governments succeed in redefining reporting as an act of war, the consequences will echo worldwide. Any critical story could be answered with lethal force. The public's right to know, the safety of those who report, and the very foundation of independent media hang in the balance. As the dust settles and outrage spreads, we're left to confront a chilling question. Is this what war reporting looks like from now on? Or have we just crossed the point of no return? But how did we reach a point where journalists are so easily recast as combatants? To understand this shift, we need to trace the patterns and pressures that have led to today's crisis. Imagine a world where a single gunshot can erase the truth, and nobody is left to tell what really happened. The killing of Al Jazeera's al-Sharif and 4 of his colleagues in Gaza was not just another tragedy. It was a seismic warning that the very act of reporting is now grounds for elimination. If journalists can be openly targeted, then every untold story risks vanishing forever. When Israel claimed responsibility for these deaths, it shattered the illusion of any safe harbor for the press in Gaza. This was not collateral damage. It was a deliberate statement. Those who document the war may be hunted, and their silence justified as military necessity. The line between war correspondent and enemy has never been thinner, and the message is as sharp as shrapnel. Tell the truth, and you may pay with your life. Al Jazeera condemned the strike as a targeted assassination, and the United Nations decried it as a grave breach of international humanitarian law. Still, Israel insisted that al-Sharif and his team were militants, offering little evidence but unwavering resolve. The chilling implication is clear. Truth-telling itself is now treated as a threat to be neutralized. International media have been largely locked out of Gaza throughout the conflict, allowed in only for rare stage-managed glimpses. Al Jazeera was among the dwindling few who bore witness from inside the besieged strip, bringing raw, unfiltered coverage to the world. With every killing, those remaining voices grow quieter, and the darkness of uncertainty grows thicker. This escalation is not contained to Gaza. If one government can silence the press with impunity, others will seize the blueprint. Labeling journalists as enemy combatants, blurring the boundary between reporting and militancy, these tactics can spread like wildfire, normalizing a world where inconvenient truths are snuffed out at the source. The precedent is deadly. When the facts become dangerous, those who reveal them become targets. The cost is borne not only by the reporters who risk their lives, but by all of us who depend on their eyes and words. Without independent witnesses, we are left vulnerable to propaganda, manipulation, and outright lies. Al-Sharif's final message echoes as a warning. If these words reach you, Israel has succeeded in killing me. His voice and the stories he died to share have been forcibly silenced. Despite global outrage and condemnation from the United Nations and press freedom groups, accountability remains a distant hope. The longer justice is delayed, the greater the danger grows for journalists everywhere, and the more the public's right to know withers under fire. But how did we reach a point where journalism itself is equated with hostility? To understand the forces reshaping war reporting, we need to look at the shifting rules of engagement and the consequences for everyone watching. How can ordinary people defend truth when the powerful try to erase it? The killing of al-Sharif did not just end a single voice, it threatened to silence a whole community's story. But this silence is not inevitable unless we allow it. Press freedom defenders say that action is urgent. Ahed Farwana of the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate warns that reporters are being deliberately targeted and calls on the international community to step up. The Committee to Protect Journalists also demands international action and accountability, insisting that such attacks cannot become the new normal. Institutions like the United Nations have condemned these strikes as grave breaches of international law. When Al Jazeera called the killing of 6 journalists a targeted assassination and accused Israeli officials of incitement, they put the world on notice. Attacks on the press are attacks on truth itself. What can we do as viewers or ordinary citizens? First, we can amplify the voices of threatened journalists, share their stories, correct disinformation, and demand that governments, our own and others, prioritize the safety of reporters. When public attention grows, so does the pressure for accountability. Support organizations that protect journalists, such as the Committee to Protect Journalists or Reporters Without Borders. Donate, volunteer, or simply help spread their urgent calls for justice. These groups can use international mechanisms to push for investigations and protection measures. We must also call for more transparent and secure channels for war reporting. That means demanding open access for international media, supporting encrypted tools that let journalists safely share their work, and pushing for policy reforms that make it harder for governments to block or target independent coverage. Most importantly, be an active, critical consumer of information. Fact-check what you see, look for multiple perspectives, and resist the urge to share unverified claims. Every viewer has a stake in protecting the free flow of facts. If we do nothing, we invite more cover-ups and more violence against journalists. But by engaging, by speaking out, supporting advocacy, and demanding transparency, we help uphold the foundations of democracy and the right to know. So what happens if these efforts fail and the world's cameras go dark? The consequences stretch far beyond Gaza, shaping not just stories, but history itself.
What if the truth is not just threatened, but hunted? Will you fight to keep it alive, or let it vanish forever? This moment is not just another headline.
It's a wake-up call for anyone who values knowing what really happens in our world. If independent reporting dies here, we lose the only barrier between reality and propaganda, and that loss is permanent. The deaths of Anas al-Sharif and his colleagues are not isolated tragedies. They are a chilling signal. In Gaza, the last witnesses now risk being erased, leaving war crimes and suffering cloaked in silence. With fewer reporters on the ground, unchecked narratives can flood in, and the world becomes blind to the truth. For the first time in nearly 2 years of conflict, a government not only kills journalists, but claims it was justified, without showing credible proof. Israel's open admission turns the targeting of reporters into a warning for all. Document suffering, and you could be branded an enemy, your voice silenced by force. International watchdogs and the United Nations call this a grave violation of law, a deliberate move to crush accountability. If impunity wins here, any government could erase inconvenient witnesses with a single accusation and a missile. Accepting this means accepting a world where evidence is erased and those in power rewrite reality without challenge. Your silence is not neutral. It helps extinguish the last sources of truth. The survival of honest journalism now depends on your vigilance. Will you help keep the light burning, or let it fade away? Because right now, the future of press freedom and your right to know hangs in the balance. The battle for truth is not distant, it is yours. Here's what you can do to defend it.